My main theme in my talk today is to speak about a tension that exists in all the history of physics up to today, a tension that exists between the way that we think about physics, the laws of physics, the way to think about nature with the laws of physics, and our own experience. And the real question is, who is winning, physics or we? If we are winning, then there will be another revolution in physics, and that is what I believe. If physics is winning, then our own experience is just an illusion if it doesn't agree with what physics tells us today. So let us start the story with the time that Newton discovered his laws. That was the beginning of classical physics. Now, I'm sure that most of you know what is new about these laws. The most important point about these laws is that they show that nature is deterministic. That means that if we know the state of everything at one time, we can predict what it will do at a later time. I think the best way to explain this determinism is by giving you two simple examples that will also remind you what the laws of Newton are and therefore what classical physics is all about. Imagine that we have just a single particle far away from every other particles, and therefore it experiences no force at all. It's completely free. And then the first law of Newton tells us that this particle will continue to have exactly the same velocity that it has at the minute when we see it. For example, if it is at rest, then it will continue forever to be at rest because there is no force that changes its velocity. If it has some particular velocity, it will continue to move all the time with the same velocity. That means that just by looking at this particle at one time and see where it is and with what velocity it moves, we can predict all its destiny, all its future, and we can also find out the history. This is a simple example of what determinism means. By looking at the condition at one time, we can determine the conditions at all other times. That is the meaning of determinism. The second example, which is example of the second law of Newton, is if we have two particles instead of one, and still far away from others. So the only forces that we have is each particle feels the force due to the other particle. And it turns out that these forces depend just on the relative position, the distance between the two particles, and their velocity. So if initially we see at a given time what is the position of the two particles and what is the velocity, we can calculate what is the force that each one of them exerts on the other. So now we have a new situation compared to what we had before. Not only the position is changing, but also the velocity. But the laws of physics tell us exactly how the velocity is changing, because that is the second law of Newton. The second law of Newton tells us that if a particle feels a force, its velocity changes accordingly. So the upshot is that even in this case, we can predict, just from knowing the condition at one time, we can predict what these two particles will do for all times in the future and what they have done for all times in the past, their destiny and their history. And now it's very easy to generalize it to any number of particles. So if we believe that all matter is just made of a large number of particles, its constituents, then it means that we can predict what every object in physics will do in the future and what the object has done in the past, just based on the information at a given time. Then Laplace, a quite well-known philosopher that lived in the beginning of the 18th century, when he thought carefully about what the laws of Newton meant, he said to himself, my God, something is really fishy here, because what's going on? If we believe that the condition at one time determine the whole future, then nothing is left for us to feel free, to be free, because all our actions are going to depend just on the locations of all our atoms at the beginning of time.
We actually have Laplace's word on slide number 6.
Okay.
His words there.
Okay.
I could read it out from here if you like.
Okay.
An intelligence knowing all the forces acting in nature at a given instant, as well as the momentary positions of all things in the universe, would be able to comprehend the motions of the largest bodies as well as the lightest atoms in the world. Nothing would be uncertain. The future as well as the past would be present to its eyes. So we have this Laplacian schema.
Essentially, somebody translated it for me because I don't know French. Okay, so here you have it. Here is the first example of the tension I'm talking about. We, as human beings, experience very strongly the notion that we have freedom. Every day we make decisions whether to do this work, this thing or that thing. We have extremely difficult decisions sometimes to make. And we believe that this worrying about what to do is a very important part of our life. And then suddenly comes this physics, this stupid physics, and tells us that, no, you're wrong. All this thing that you think about is just an illusion. Is it possible that it's indeed just an illusion? Well, it's difficult to see why it could not be, and I want to tell you two stories that will show that indeed this could be, all our feeling about freedom could be just an illusion. The first story is about a trial in front of a judge. Comes the accused, who is accused of some crime, and the punishment for this crime should be some years in prison. Now the judge asked this criminal, or this accused, do you admit your guilt, your crime? He said, yes, I admit it. So the judge said, well, can you say anything on your behalf before I pass sentence on you? And then this guy says, oh yes, I have something to say. Your Honor, you are a very educated man, I'm sure. And you have read what Newton told us, that we are made just of atoms, of particles, and therefore all our actions are completely dictated by these atoms. I had no freedom at all to do something else, and therefore I should not be punished for something that I could not control. So the judge thinks for a minute, and he gets confused for a minute, and then suddenly he has a smile on his face, says, but I'm also made of atoms. And my atoms dictate for me that you must go to prison for 5 years. So here is an example that looks completely consistent with our everyday life. The judge made the sentence just as he would do if he would have been free. But something smells bad here. Because after all, the judge more or less admitted that this guy was not guilty, but the judge says, okay, I'm putting you in prison because I don't have also freedom. It doesn't look right, but that's what physics is telling us. Another example is an example. Where were we? Yes. All right, so what options do we have? There are two options. One is to accept the idea that indeed freedom is just an illusion, and the other is in fact to say that maybe it's not an illusion, and that's an indication that something is not right in our laws of physics. If our laws of physics are trying to tell us that we don't have freedom, and we are so convinced that we have freedom, that maybe that conviction tells us that the laws of physics is not complete yet, because they tell us something wrong, about our own behavior. Now we come back to the question that you raised at the beginning. Namely, we know that we are not just physical beings. Every one of us has also subjective feelings when we listen to a beautiful music, when we fall in love, when we feel pain, when we see a color red. Nobody can tell us exactly what is our experience. Nobody can be sure whether his experience will be the same as our experience. There is something subjective here that cannot be put in formulas at all. So, if human beings, all of us, have properties that cannot be discussed by physics, maybe physics also does not hold for us when we discuss our actions, and then there is no problem at all. But that is impossible, because suppose that I decide to make my hand move this way rather than that way. And suppose that decision is made not only because of all the forces that act on the atoms due to the position of other atoms, but because I had some subjective, call it spiritual properties that are outside of physics, and if these spiritual properties affected my decision whether to go this way or that way, that means that there is something wrong here, because there is something that comes from outside of physics and affect the atoms to behave this way or that way, and not the usual forces. So if we believe that physics should account for all situations of motion of atoms and motion of bodies, then to the extent that we have these subjective things, these spiritual things, they are not allowed to intervene in the physical world. They can make us feel more happy, less happy, that's okay, but they are not allowed to intervene in our actions. And when we speak about the issue whether we are sure or not, we believe that this is also relevant for our actions. Should we go this way or that way, or do this thing or that thing? That is an action that involves the physical world. This is the subtle case. Our conclusion so far, at the time of classical physics, is that either classical physics laws are correct, and all our belief that we are free is just a big illusion, or there's something still missing in classical physics that will eventually be changed, and the new laws of physics that we will find after that will show that our experience is correct and there is some freedom that